Hi, I'm Jennifer Queen with the Jennifer Queen team and RE/MAX Professionals here in Winnipeg, Manitoba. And I apologize in advance. Today's video is definitely going to be on the longer side for what we normally record for videos, but it's because the subject matter is just so important. Today, we're going to be talking about house hunting trips and how to properly plan for them. So stay tuned. So if you are planning a house hunting trip anytime soon and you've chosen Winnipeg, congrats, you've chosen a great city to move to, I promise you. All the stories you hear are made up for when you are here and you experience our beautiful summers, our wonderful people, and all of the cultural diversity, cuisine that comes with it that there is to experience here. So welcome. But when you are planning for your house hunting trip, or as some people often call it, is their HHT, you have a few considerations you need to make before getting here. So the first thing I want to highlight too is every relocation is different. A lot of the work that we oftentimes do on our team is military, RCMP, some arm of the Canadian Armed Forces, and a lot of corporate relocations too. We are a registered BGRS supplier as a result. So something just important if this is your first relocation and you're doing it through the BGRS services, you want to be sure that you are utilizing a realtor that is on their approved supplier list, just to guarantee that you will be reimbursed for those moving expenses. Not to mention, BGRS is responsible for about 15,000 relocations across Canada every year. And you want to be sure that you are utilizing a realtor that knows their procedures, as well as the realistic timelines that are put forth and demands that are put forth by those contracts. Having a realtor with expertise in this area is truly paramount to the success of your whole house hunting trip. Now, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. For those that have been on house hunting trips before, you probably have recognized that the process itself can be incredibly stressful. We're often working in a limited time frame with the options that are available during that time frame and trying to make best case decisions for your future years living in the city. And I hate to say it, but a lot of the process we can't control. It's a lot of trial by fire as well. A typical house hunting trip here is around a week long. That's typically what BGRS or other companies allow when their employees are coming here to do their house hunting trip. 8 nights or 7 nights is pretty darn typical, and that does go fast. So with these timelines in mind, here's kind of where we start the process and where you should be leading up to the process. So step 1, you receive that notice of your potential job and location change. This is when you are made aware you're going to be moving, the orders have been called in. It is time to start thinking about new city. If you are a BGRS move, they often call it your posting message. Usually, this is several months out from your actual reporting date for when you are to start work here. Second step, if you're a BGRS move, at this point is a good time to sign on to the BGRS portal, download the relocation directive and kind of start going through it. They've actually kind of divvied it up nicely where it's got clickable chapters so that you don't have to read it from start to finish. You can actually just pick the section that's relevant to you and kind of click through and take it in as you need it. And if you need that link, we have a copy of the directive as well that we can send to you. Step 3 is usually figuring out what to do with your current home. If you're renting, usually that could mean finding a subletter, or it could just mean letting the lease expire depending on how much time you have left on it. So less stress there if you've been renting in your previous place. If you have a place though that you own, you're going to have really 2 options essentially. Either you keep it or you sell it. Of course, there's no rule that you have to sell a house as long as the bank says it's fine. BGRS rules also don't stipulate that you have to sell your home. You can hold on to it. In fact, for those that are in the BGRS program, there are some incentives to keep your home. It depends on your situation, but for CFIRP rewards members, when you don't sell, there's cost savings inherent for BGRS by not having to pay commissions, lawyer fees for your sale. Sometimes they will actually incentivize you to hold on to the property. A lot of people, what they do is they put tenants in place in their properties while they're away. Of course, if you're moving far away or you don't have a good support base to watch your property while you are gone, I get that that can be concerning, but that is an option that some people do take advantage of. Regardless though, here what I'll say at this point is, if you do choose to sell your home, or if you choose to hold on to it, rent it out, or whatever is right for your situation, a recommendation would be to get an appraisal done at this time. This will come in handy for a few different circumstances down the road, but it's nice to have a formal written appraisal report as of the day you're leaving that property, so that you know where you stand. It also can be beneficial for future tax purposes as well. And similar to the realtor component, you're going to want to make sure that you're hiring an appraiser that is on the BGRS list, because a lot of the time they will reimburse these appraisers. If you're not even a BGRS move, no worries. I still recommend getting the appraisal done. You just have a few less hoops to jump through, because there's different reporting procedures for a BGRS move versus a non-BGRS move. So just something to keep in mind. But for those that are moving, I never think that you will regret having an appraisal done. Step 4, consult the professionals. And this might even come before step 3 above, just to see what's right for you. Sometimes people will want a rough opinion of value from a realtor before they decide if they're renting or keeping their home. Totally fine, totally normal. If you are BGRS or corporate relocation or some other kind of relocation, this is a good time to get recommendations too. Ask fellow friends and colleagues who they've used as a realtor, who has experience in this area doing relocations. Kind of get a few options so that you have a pool of people that you trust and you know you can call upon when the time comes. What's important at this point is really to just start becoming an informed buyer as well as an informed seller, educating yourself on the market and having those resources to pull from if you need them. Of course, a lot of the time what we're finding is somebody that is moving with BGRS is not moving elsewhere in Manitoba. Even sometimes they'll move to Shiloh, but essentially you're usually moving further away than just the Manitoba borders, and as a result you're going to need recommendations for realtors, appraisers, home inspectors in your next city. And what your realtor can do, I know that myself as well as members of my team and even office and RE/MAX in general, what we do is we do have colleagues in other cities that we've met through conferences, even social media sometimes, kind of masterminds, so we know who we would be comfortable recommending you to in other cities. So you might not know anybody in the city you're moving to, but reach out to a local realtor in your current city that you trust, and I bet you they can put you in touch with somebody. A lot of the time at this point in the process, I'm starting to get those phone calls from people moving to Winnipeg. So they're calling me so it's typically still a few months out, they're calling me essentially to interview me, to see what the market here is like, what they can expect in the process, what realistically their budget can afford, and also to just learn about the landscape of the city. Like if you're reporting to 17 Wing, where do people typically move? Those sorts of things. If you're working in the downtown core, where is a good area to live with decent commutes from there? Another common one. Or we also have 2 major teaching hospitals here in Manitoba, and as a result we have a lot of incoming medical professionals, doctors, and they also want to know where good places to reside are in those areas too. So all common questions. Don't feel bad calling a realtor several months out to start getting the lay of the land, ideas on the process, and whether or not you'd be a good fit with this realtor too. Step 5 in this process is really working out your house hunting trip timing. I get it, life happens, it's not always the case, but ideally we can work a door-to-door move. However, this might not always be possible. For example, people moving with RCMP oftentimes aren't sent for their move until their current home has sold. So a lot of the time what we recommend in situations like that is to just give yourself a little bit of buffer, request longer possession periods, that sort of thing, so that you have time to schedule and go and book your house hunting trip on the other side. And sorry, I'm using acronyms here, but the people that this applies to will completely understand. But for those moving with CAFRD or CFIRP, you can schedule your trip really at any point, but of course you're going to want to be strategic and booking it at a right time to get you the right possession in your next destination. You can even schedule this trip before your current home is even on the market. However, you are going to want to consult with your realtors closely about what the proper timing is. A lot of the time what I will do is I will ask for the name of the realtor on the other side. So if it is buyers moving to Winnipeg that I'm going to be helping find a home, I will call their agent that is selling their home in the other location and just get a sense of what their estimates are for timelines in terms of how long it will take to sell, what typical possessions are, so that I know what we're working with on our end before we start booking anything here. But again, this is why it's important to get a realtor that is familiar with this process, because you want them to be able to coordinate the entire process, even if it means working with a realtor from another province. Totally normal. You're not asking a lot here. It's just a matter of organizing all of those moving pieces and lining them up properly. In Winnipeg, typical possession dates are around 1 to 3 months in time. So if I was writing an offer today, I would be expecting on average to get those keys around that 2-month mark from now, oftentimes like 45 days. That's quite common. As a result, when I'm usually trying to schedule these house hunting trips for people, I ask for their ideal date to be moving in, taking keys, taking possession of their house here, and then essentially reverse engineer it, work backwards from there, and figure out when the right day is to come. Also, all real estate, at least in Winnipeg, kind of works on a cycle. You'll notice a bulk of the listings go in at a certain time of the week, with offers oftentimes early the following week. So knowing how to take advantage of maybe not just 1 but 2 real estate cycles so that clients are getting the benefit of 2 weeks of inventory is another kind of strategic adjustment we can make to planning your house hunting trip. But yes, always reach out to your realtor, figure out what those optimal timelines are, because that is what will result in your success. Always reach out to your realtor, consult with them on what ideal timelines would be so that you are here when you should be and to really maximize your opportunities for success. Okay, so with these initial discussions, you likely have an idea of what to expect in your new place. You probably have talked to a realtor at this point, explained what your needs are in your next house, if you need this many bedrooms, this many bathrooms, a yard, a fenced yard, if you have pets, those sorts of things. And the realtor will likely have been able to roughly give you an idea of what you could be expecting to spend in the areas that sound like they would be ideal for you. Of course, none of this is perfect, but this is the point, if you haven't already, where you really need to start working on that pre-approval. Depending on your timelines, you might not do a complete pre-approval process at this point. So say you're not going to be in Winnipeg for another 4 months or so. There's no real point in pulling your credit bureau and running all that if your rate is going to have expired by then anyways. Essentially, you're at this point getting in touch with a mortgage broker or your lender, whoever you're comfortable with. And if you need recommendations, of course, let us know. We can always give great recommendations for a mortgage broker we wholeheartedly trust that is familiar with all of these processes. But essentially at that point, what they're going to be doing is kind of a rough pre-approval just to give you an idea of what your budget should be realistically. The more formal pre-approval I find, at least with the mortgage brokers we often work with, is they don't actually put in for the formal pre-approval until a couple weeks before you're coming out here, so that we know that your pre-approval is in place, it's current, and you have a certain number of days now where this rate is guaranteed for you. But typically these rate holds are good for 90 to 120 days, so you don't want to do it too far in advance, but you do definitely want to start those conversations in advance. And of course, there's always so much paperwork to get in for these pre-approvals that it's just good to get what you can in up front, so that when you're down to like that last week or two before your house hunting trip and you're starting to feel the time constraints that you don't have this huge file to send off to your lender just to get the process started. Do as much legwork as you can up front. One more thing I will caution you on, and it's totally fine if you want to use your lender from another province. I'm never going to prevent anybody from using their lender. I just recommend having an open and frank discussion with them prior to coming here, because what I have found, especially with people coming from BC or Ontario or even the East Coast a lot of the time, is they come here and their lenders all request 2 weeks for financing, which is quite uncommon in Manitoba. I would say typically, especially if you're competing, like you're going to be trying to get your financing conditions wrapped up on any offer within 3 business days, sometimes 5 if we're not competing. We're going to start getting questions from realtors when we're submitting offers if we have concerns over the financing on this file or why do we need so long. It's going to be a bit of a red flag. I know that sounds crazy, but that's just how fast things move here. So just make sure you have that discussion with your lender if they're from out of province when you're coming here, just to let them know that Manitoba is where you're buying and the norm here is 3 to 5 business days and things move pretty darn fast. But yes, I hate to say it, we've lost deals because of lenders from out of province requesting 2 or 3 times the norm of what we normally see here, and it's killed deals. Like they say, time can kill all deals. Okay, so step 7 is plan your travel. So a lot of the time this is being covered by work or BGRS services, but just know the rules too. For example, if you're a BGRS move, you are driving if you are under 599 kilometers distance to your destination. However, once you hit that 600 kilometer threshold, you can fly. So you just want to make sure you're following those rules, because it would be horrible to book your flights and then discover later that you cannot be reimbursed for them because your destination was only 500 kilometers away. You also want to be sure you're following the proper procedures. Some companies I have found have an app that they get you to book through. It is a third-party provider and ultimately connects you to the different airline companies. Some though allow you to book it and then just show your receipt for reimbursement later. You just want to be familiar with the processes you're doing. There's no right or wrong. You just want to be sure you're on side so that you do get reimbursed for your travel expenses. You are also going to be given a stipend most likely for a rental vehicle when you are here. And if you are, I highly recommend taking full advantage of that. Oftentimes when people are coming to look at houses, they will still come in the car with me, and that's completely up to you. Some couples want to be in the car with me and then we kind of discuss the areas as we're driving and kind of giving them a bit of background and history. Although I've also had couples that are a little more private almost, and they just want to have that time to decompress and have those discussions while we're driving to the next one, but have some privacy there too. Either is honestly fine. It never hurts my feelings if you don't want to ride in my car. Heck, half the time people are riding in my car, it's pretty embarrassing because I'm trying to scooch all the fish crackers from my children off the seats. But just know that you don't have to ride with your realtor, but you really should get a car when you are here. Half of what I have found people end up doing when they are here is not just looking at houses themselves. It's actually driving to the different neighborhoods, doing circles kind of after our showings are done for the day, but getting a feel of what the neighborhood is like in the evening, looking at the house like again on the street and in relation to where it is from schools, from public services, from landmarks, all those sorts of things. Some people will actually intentionally drive the commute. So they'll get up and drive to work at what would be their typical start time in the morning and see how long it takes and what that traffic is like. And some people too, oftentimes I find they want to see, because they hear about how great our lakes are here in Manitoba and how quick you can get to lake country. So what they'll do is they will make some of those destinations too, just to get a sense of what it's like to get around the city and also out of the city. And I think having your own car while you're here is paramount to that success. I very highly recommend it. So step 8, I kind of like talked about travel there and it makes it sound like we're further ahead than we are, but we aren't really. That was just about booking your travel and having a vehicle and the benefits of it. But what step 8 is, still prior to you even leaving. You've booked your travel, you've booked your rental car, you've probably booked your hotel at this point. Step 8 though is to start getting a sense of the options available. So what a lot of people will do early on, preliminary, before maybe even contacting a realtor, just kind of when there's whispers that they might be getting relocated, is they will start looking at realtor.ca, which is great. But once you're getting closer to move date, kind of a month or two out, maybe even more, it depends on you and how much information you want, is they will connect with me and ask me to start emailing them listings so that they can see essentially what is being listed, what it's being listed at, what it's actually selling for, how quickly the process moves, what typical possessions are, just to start gaining that information. A lot of that you can't see on realtor.ca. You can see the price it was listed at here, but you can't, in Manitoba at least, see what it's sold for. So getting that education up front, and then say there's a home that looks great online, and of course, remember, pictures aren't always the same as what we see in person, but say there's a listing that looks amazing to you online and you want to know just how competitive it was. That's why it's important to see what it actually sells for, because sometimes we'll see listings here posted for $500,000 and people with a budget of $500,000 think they can afford this home, but it turns out it sold for $600,000. You never know. That's an extreme example, but you also want to be realistic in your expectations coming here, that if your max is say $500,000, that maybe you're only looking at houses up to $450,000 if it's a competitive market, and strategizing accordingly. And information is power, of course, so that we know how to start setting up your search and making sure you are getting listings that are relevant to you and are homes you would actually consider. My goal is, in setting you up on these portals and starting to deliver information to you at appropriate times, is that when you arrive in Winnipeg, you are ready to hit the ground running. Step 9. So you're on your portal, you're getting the information, you know the listings you like. It is going to be time to start packing for your trip. I know it sounds funny, but I do have a lot of people reach out wanting help on how to pack. They don't know how to pack for the weather here. And don't be embarrassed, like reach out, ask. I am always happy to tell you what we are typically wearing throughout the season so that you know and you're mentally and physically prepared. In addition to, of course, your clothing, there are 3 major things that I'm going to ask you to set aside or put in your suitcase now, even if it's a couple weeks before you leave. The first one, shoes that you can easily slip on and off. I know that that sounds silly, but you would be surprised by how many people come and they have these beautiful shoes that takes them 5 minutes to put on and off. And they are just exhausted by the time we've seen the 5th house, and they're so sick of their shoes. Sometimes people will even go and buy Crocs in a store here. Not saying you have to do that, but I've had it happen. But you want to wear shoes that you can easily slip on and off. We spend a lot of time going in and out of houses on this process, so kind of not tiring yourself out both physically, but also saving that time so that we can focus on the house and not eat up valuable time taking shoes on and off is paramount. The next thing you're going to need is a piece of government issued photo identification. This is required by your realtor to identify you when they start working with you, because we need to make sure that we are compliant on our end. We have federal reporting requirements to prevent money laundering. So for those reasons, we will have to take down that information to start the process. And the third one, which often comes as a surprise, is a checkbook. So there are ways around this, but you will need to give a deposit with your offer. My brokerage, what we sometimes do, is they do allow e-transfers. You aren't allowed to wire money into accounts. We're not allowed to give out our trust account numbers here in Manitoba. It's against the rules. But what we can do is set up e-transfers so that you can email the brokerage a certain amount of money to have sitting in our trust account, so that when a property does come up, we just have a check and we cut it on your behalf from those funds you've given us. The alternative though is that you bring checks. Doesn't have to be a bank draft or certified checks or anything. It can be good old-fashioned checkbook. I just find that not a lot of people have checkbooks anymore. I know it's becoming fewer and more far between when I ask somebody if they have a check and they say yes. So just know that we are going to need to figure out a way to get money from you that will accompany your offer in the form of a deposit when we are submitting offers here. And There is no preset amount either. The amount of deposit I'm going to recommend will actually depend on the price of the home itself, as well as the level of competition. So we'll advise on that accordingly in those initial conversations as to what you need to have set aside. But just know you're going to have some kind of access to liquid cash that can be handed over at some point while we're submitting these offers. And I should say too, like if you say you bank at RBC in another province and then you come here and you want to take your funds out of your bank account from RBC, we can do bank drafts and certified checks with our offer. It's just a little bit more tedious of a process for you in the event that you're writing multiple offers, because each time your offer would get rejected, we would collect that check and then we would take it back to the bank, get them to reimburse your account, and it's just not a super smooth sailing process, but sometimes that's the best option. It really depends on the situation. So just know that is an option. It's just one of those things where I would say the easiest solution is to just bring your checkbook. Okay, so just prior to coming here, usually a day, 2, 3 maybe out, what I will request that my clients do is send me their top 10 or top 15 list of homes. For me personally, getting out and seeing as many homes as possible in the first day or 2 is really paramount to success later on in the week. I like to front load as many listings as I can on those first 2 days so that we've essentially seen the most important properties to the client right away so that they have complete information they're working from. Of course, in this time, there's going to probably be some other listings coming up. So usually day 2, maybe day 3, we're going to see the new listings that have come up, but at least we have a base from which we are working from, knowing these are our top houses. Usually we can narrow it down to top 2, maybe top 3, and start strategizing in terms of offers for those ones. But a lot of the time, having that top 10, 15 list really helps me to triage exactly what order to see things in. Having that ranking also helps to make sure that there isn't this one listing you're waiting to see before you make a decision about others. That I find that can really hold people back if there's one listing that was their absolute favorite, it had risen to the top, and then every other house we see they can't really focus on because they've got this one house in the back of their minds. A lot of the time what I'll even try and do is start at that house so that they have this base that we're working from. And also by front loading, you have to remember that this isn't necessarily just a process of selection, it's a process of elimination too. Seeing as many as we can right off the hop helps us to eliminate a lot of that noise from the background and hone in on what is important. And then just when you're doing this triage process, like whatever you can do to kind of narrow things down helps as well. So when I get your top 10, top 15 list, let's say, usually what I start doing is I go through those houses that you want to see, and if there's red flags, I'm going to start bringing them to your attention at that point. I don't want you to go down a rabbit hole of getting excited about a property if it turns out it needs $100,000 worth of foundation repair, right? On your end, it's always a good idea to do Google drive-bys of the home. I have had people not familiar with the city not realize that there was a train nearby or, you know, a loud power station, those sorts of things. And then of course I will point those out, but at the same time, it's good as you're starting to formulate that list to just do some quick Google drive-bys to see, hey, what's around this property? Can we live here? The house might be beautiful, but say all the neighbors' houses are hideous, you know, those sorts of things. Just do those Google drive-bys and make sure you're comfortable with the neighborhood too. So now you are packing up and you are arriving here. So day 1 depends on when you arrive. I found my last few trips, they were arriving kind of late in the day after 5 o'clock. And then by the time you get your rental car, you get checked into your hotel, you unpack a little bit, maybe even have a shower, who knows. There's not a lot of time left in the day, and especially lately we've had some major travel delays in and out of Winnipeg, so it can be a little bit harder to adjust. So oftentimes, and this is totally fine, what people will do in that first evening that they are here is just drive around, kind of drive by, again, their favorite listings, do a physical drive-by just to start getting a sense of the city itself. If you're arriving early in the day, of course, we can get out and see some houses too that day, but I oftentimes find it's more likely than not that people are getting in pretty late, and by the time they're settled, all they have left in their gas tank is, mental gas tank I should say, is that energy to just do a quick drive to their favorites and see what the areas are like. But oftentimes doing these drive-through areas eliminates entire chunks of areas of the city that people wouldn't live. Some people think they're gonna like a certain neighborhood when they move here, and then they get here, they drive around it, they find they don't like it. That's actually good though. Again, it's a process of elimination just as much as it is a process of selection. So figuring out where you are comfortable and where you are not is important. So getting some time in that car day one is honestly paramount to success. I really do encourage it. So days 2 and 3, so say you arrived evening prior, so we didn't really see any properties because you were a little bit later in the day arriving. Typically what that means then is days 2 and days 3 are heavy showings, with day 2 typically being the heaviest. It's not uncommon for me to try and fit in about 12 to 15 showings on that first day. I don't know if that sounds like a lot to people, but what we often will say to clients that live here already is no more than seeing 5 or 6 properties at one time. They all start to blur together, and it just becomes too much. It does become a bit of a scheduling nightmare too. But when you are a house hunting trip, you don't have the luxury of time. We're seeing several weeks of inventory, right? So we're going to really go hard and go heavy on the showings those first couple of days. For at least day 1, when we're trying to work through your top 10 or top 15 list, essentially what I'm doing in that process is booking slightly more abbreviated showings so we can get through more properties. With the understanding with you that if there's anything that you really like and want to take a more in-depth look at, we can always revisit. It's essentially getting through that process of elimination and figuring out what our top choices are, you getting a sense of what the options truly are, not just in pictures, but in person, so that you are comfortable in making that decision and figuring out which ones you would like to revisit the following day. So then again, day 3, a lot of the time we'll see maybe some that were lower on the list, or maybe scheduling conflicts couldn't get into. Usually that doesn't happen. But day 3 is oftentimes revisiting the ones we've already seen. It might also be visiting new ones that have popped up since you sent me your top 10 2 days ago kind of thing. So at this point, we are still seeing a lot of homes. I'll admit it, it's gonna still be, day 3 will still be a heavy day of showings, but it won't be nearly as heavy typically as day 2. But the goal always is by the end of day 3 to essentially have an idea of what house or houses you are seriously considering and what areas you are seriously considering. Step 13 is really putting together our game plan. So at this point, we've found a few houses that really work for you, maybe one that's by far and above the rest. Who knows? It depends on what it is you're looking for. But you will probably have a front runner at this point. And what we're going to want to do at this point is figure out strategies for how to secure that home for you. In Manitoba, if there is an offer date, that is the date you can present offers, but you cannot review them prior to that. There's no such thing as bully offers here like in other provinces, or preemptive offers, they're often called. You can't. That realtor will lose their license if they present an offer prior to their offer deadline. If you see OTP or offers to be presented on a listing, that is the date. It will not sell before that date. You have until that date to see that home and strategize. There are other things we can do though to set ourselves up for success at this point. Depending on your relocation package, you might have been given the benefit of a home inspection. If we think it's going to be a competitive offer situation on the house you're buying, we can look at doing a pre-inspection, which is an inspection prior to that offer date, so you have the benefit of a home inspection, but then by the time offers come, you can write that offer without a home inspection condition because you've already done one. Of course, the negative here is that you don't get the house and then that money is gone and you have to do another home inspection on another property. And it depends on your employer too. I've had clients that had employers that there was no restriction or limit on how many inspections they could have. So really they didn't mind either way. But I've also had employers that only allowed one home inspection. So you just want to make sure you read that fine print. A full home inspection here typically costs anywhere from $400 to $600 plus once you start adding on packages like infrared. But there's also pre-inspection options, which is a more abbreviated home inspection that you can do for a lesser cost. Some starting as low as $200 is where I've seen the quotes. So, but consult with your realtor, see what's right for you and your situation, and then essentially formulate from there. Step 14 is submitting that offer. So congrats, you found a house you love enough to submit an offer on. Now comes the terrifying part of putting pen to paper. And just to be clear, I am not saying that you have to be submitting an offer on day 3 or around there. There are ebbs and flows in every real estate search, and we just have to pivot and go with the best information that we have. But if you aren't writing an offer by day 3, don't feel bad. I've had people not write offers until after they've left. We might have seen the property before they departed the city, but then due to the offer date, it's not going to be something that they're here for still. So there's all kinds of ways we can navigate this, but usually around day 3, day 4, we're starting to formulate an offer. What I will say though, and I see it time and time again, is by day 3, day 4, you start to kind of see if somebody hasn't found the perfect property for them, you start to see almost this sense of panic. And don't fret. Honestly, there will always be more homes coming up and we will get you into them. Don't worry. But don't feel that pressure to find something by day 3 or day 4 or think that you're going to be homeless. I promise you won't be. Sometimes around that day 3 or 4 mark too, I do, in addition to people starting to kind of get that panic, it almost is like they lose sight of the goal and they start getting desperate and grasping at straws, considering neighborhoods they wouldn't have considered before, considering houses they wouldn't have considered before. Do not fret. Do not let yourself get pushed to follow that box of timelines. Because again, if you are stress buying and buying something out of sheer panic, you're going to make a bad decision. That's the be all end all here. We want to always revisit our list of what was important to us in the home we bought in Winnipeg or wherever you're going. And we also want to go over the whys of why we're buying where we intend to buy. We also want to revisit the communities too. Maybe something's not sitting right with you. Maybe it turns out this community that is perfect on paper and is only 5-minute commute to work, you just don't love it when you're driving through it and something just feels off. That's a conversation to really revisit. There's no point in forcing a square peg into a round hole here. This is where you're going to live. This is a very personal decision. You want to feel very comfortable with the decision. So don't let those timelines put too much pressure on you. But I often find going back to that list of original goals helps people to realign, take a deep breath, and get comfortable with the process. I've even had people where I didn't even see them on day 3 or 4. They just wanted to drive the city again and get a sense of all the neighborhoods before we continued looking. And that was okay too. It worked out just fine. They still found a place while they were here. Okay, all that being said, if you do submit an offer on day 3 or day 4, your timing really couldn't be more ideal because it oftentimes means you're going to be here for the home inspection process, through the negotiation process, and to kind of be here to oversee any other additional items. At the time of recording this, we are in a seller's market, although that has been much of what Winnipeg has been for the last several years. As a result of it being a seller's market, if you're in competition, it's far more difficult to have an offer accepted if you have a home inspection condition in place. So because of that, we will sometimes do those pre-inspections like I mentioned before, and then this gives you time to do it while you're here. I love when my clients can be present for the home inspection. Half of it is going through all of the concerns of a home, but the other half is honestly like a home ownership manual. So if you're a first-time home buyer, this is the water meter and where you shut it off. This is how you turn on the air conditioning. This is how you change your filter in your furnace. A lot of just helpful things that if you haven't done them before. But yeah, I really do prefer when my clients are here for that home inspection. As good as I can relay all of the information that's provided at that home inspection, it's always better for you to hear it firsthand and to get that information direct from the inspector and to see all the components. There's always things that we could miss in a half-hour, 1-hour showing versus a 3-hour home inspection that the home inspector will have time to explain and go over with you. So it's really nice when you can be there. If you can't be there, totally understand. Don't be hard on yourself if you can't be there, but if you can, try to be there for the home inspection. Step 15. At this point, if you haven't already, now is a good time to get connected with a lawyer and an insurer. Again, these are recommendations your realtor can give you. A lot of the time they've worked with many lawyers and they know who's capable of handling the file. If it's a relocation with specific procedures like the BGRS providers, or if it's just other relocation services too. It's always good to be sure you have connected with those individuals before you leave. Let them know that you will be submitting an offer, that you will be asking them to help you with closing and getting insurance in place. I'll admit, like in terms of priority, these do fall a little bit lower on the priority list because half of the time finding the house is the biggest priority while you're here, and a lot of the stuff with the lawyer and with the insurers can be done remotely via phone or email. So, but it's still a good sense to get connected with somebody while you're here. Just remember too, it's important to get that insurance in place prior to possession. Lawyers here will not, and I'm sure probably in every other province, will not hand over keys to you if you do not have insurance in place on the property for possession. It's often a stipulation put forth by the lender in the mortgage documents that the lawyers are required to adhere to. For providers like BGRS, they don't have rules on which insurers you can use, but they do have rules on the BGRS approved lawyer list. So if ever you need advice on that, let me know, or I know several of the BGRS approved lawyers that I would very highly recommend because they're quite familiar with the processes and I know that there won't be any hiccups on closing. Step 16. So you buy your house, you've reached out to your lawyer, confirmed they're accepting the file, you've worked on getting your insurance in place, and now what? You typically at the end of this week, there's actually a day or two maybe where you can just get out and have some fun. These days do tend to be a little bit lighter, so I've had a lot of clients go check out landmarks, beaches, some of our cuisines here. There's a lot to do, and we've actually created a relocation guide just with some hot spots that you can visit. It also has information on neighborhoods and whatnot. So be sure to reach out to us. My email is in the comment section below and I can get you a copy of that relocation guide because we definitely want you to see all of the fun spots and places that Manitoba has to offer. There's a lot of them. Step 17 happens typically after you've flown back to your house and maybe you've come back here already, maybe you haven't. The last couple of my clients weren't here, but is key handover. So the way that key handover works here, my understanding is it's often different from other provinces. In Manitoba, the lawyers handle the handover of keys, as realtors can't be trusted to do so, I guess. But the way that things work here, pre-possession walkthroughs aren't really a common thing. It would be a special provision we would write into a contract just to request, but it would not be a common thing to see in a contract here. And I know that sounds really weird. What will actually happen is you will have a specified date on your contract that you are to gain access to the property. That's your possession time. And your lawyer will hand you keys oftentimes in advance of this and make you sign a letter that says, I promise not to access the property prior to such and such date. And then essentially they just trust you to go in at the appropriate time. Your lawyer will also give you specific access instructions, if there's alarm codes, those sorts of things. They will also give you instructions on your initial meter readings. And of course, the process for reporting if there are any issues, but you aren't gaining access to the property until the possession timeline is. That's what's typical here. But if anything does go awry on possession, please still reach out to your realtor. Just because we're not handling the key handover, it doesn't mean that we don't still want to be included in the process. It's just we don't have that authority to do those key handovers. So if you can let us know if there's any issues, or even when you're going to be at the property accessing it for the first time, a lot of the time we like to join you for that and do a little walkthrough with you just to go over everything. Just so that you have peace of mind in how you found the property, and of course a witness if there is something that is awry. But keep your realtor involved, please, or at least if it's me, keep me involved, and so I know my team members share the same sentiment. But just because the lawyers are handling that key handover doesn't mean we don't want to be a part of that process. And step 18, everything's been hectic. You've packed everything into boxes. You don't even know where your charging cables are at this point. but that's okay, that's normal. But what I don't want you to forget is to file any additional paperwork you need for reimbursement. Sometimes there are timelines on how long you can request to be reimbursed for some of your reimbursable expenses you incurred while you had your house hunting trip. So just be sure you're keeping a folder with those all organized so that when the time comes to file your claims, you are able to recoup all of those expenses you incurred along the process. So that's kind of it for the house hunting trip portion, and more specifically how it relates to relocations in Winnipeg. There's a few other topics too, though, I would like to touch upon. Oftentimes find people forget about. Just remember closing costs, depending on your employer and their relocation package. Some employers pay everything up front on your behalf. Some require you to collect receipts and file for reimbursement. So just always, again, like I said prior, keep track of all of those receipts. Keep them in a folder somewhere that you can easily access them even once all your stuff has been moved. Huge benefit if your employer has direct billing, but I would say not all do. It really depends. And if ever you want a list of typical closing costs here in Manitoba, just let me know, reach out to me. We have a little worksheet we can put together for you, essentially, that will show you closing costs for your move here. Also, let me know if you want a copy of our home buying guide. We have a home buyer's guide that essentially goes over all of the steps of buying a home. Not only that, but also it has sample offers to purchase, home inspections, worksheets. Again, the worksheet too about figuring out your closing costs that you can work through so that you're as educated as possible when you're coming here. We've also developed a house hunting trip guide, again, that we can provide to you, and essentially it breaks down what the process looks like, kind of what I've talked about here. It also has supplier recommendations, hotel recommendations, dining recommendations, as well as brief overviews of some of the neighborhoods. And if you haven't already, be sure to watch our videos on YouTube of all the different neighborhoods that we've covered. I think at this point we're close to 50 neighborhoods we've covered, and we're adding another 20 neighborhoods I think this summer. So yeah, just keep an eye on our channel because we probably have a video on the area you might be considering, and a lot of the time we find that people are able to either rule in or rule out neighborhoods as a result of those videos. So anyways, thanks again for watching today, guys. I do apologize again. This is incredibly long-winded, even longer than I had intended at the very beginning, but there's so much to know when you're planning a house hunting trip. Just know that I would say of all these steps I've gone over, the most important step is finding somebody that you align with, because you need to feel comfortable and confident and have that trust in whoever's representing you on the other side. Not only are you moving to another city that you might not know, and that is terrifying enough, it's even more terrifying if you're not comfortable with the person you're working with. So who you work with really does matter. Again, if you need any recommendations, reach out. I'm happy to give recommendations from other cities too, not just Winnipeg. Of course, if you're looking for representation here, by all means, call me. I'm either myself or someone on my team would be very happy to work with you. And we work with several relocations every year. This is something we're quite versed in and we know the process. So feel free to reach out, but I don't mean to shamelessly self-plug myself here. And again, thanks so much for watching. If you like this content, be sure to hit the like button below. It really does help me in determining just what kind of content to come out with next. And also be sure to follow our channel so that you continue to get content similar to this. Thanks again, guys.